Hello Facebook, hello YouTube, what is up everybody? This is Ruben and I'm back with another Ruben Report. For today's video, we're going to be revisiting the topic of should you buy a CSC motorcycle to save money on gas. For those of you who have been following along with my story already, you already know what the deal is. Go ahead and check the description for timestamps of categories that may be of interest to you. But for those who are new here, I want to share with you guys a bit of my background, my history of motorcycles, what led me to purchase a CSC motorcycle in the first place, and what gave me the idea to want to utilize motorcycles to save money on gas. So let's start with the question of what gave me the idea to want to utilize motorcycles to save money on gas in the first place. Well, in the last 2 to 3 years, I have seen the most steady rise of gas prices within my state. I live in the state of California, and we already have some of the highest costs of living across the nation. But for gas prices in particular, it's just absolutely ridiculous. And that's what led me to want to look for alternative methods of transportation. My main vehicle that I utilize for commuting and getting around town in the first place was a pickup truck, and my pickup truck got 13 miles to the gallon. And having to spend over $100 just to fill up my pickup truck every week to get back and forth from work just wasn't cutting it anymore. So I was eager to find an alternative method to get around. And some of those alternative methods that I was considering at the time was a bicycle, an electric bicycle, and a scooter. All of those methods have their pros and cons when it comes to certain situations, but for my daily commute that I had at the time, it was about a 20 miles round trip, 10 miles each way. And for that task, some of those options weren't going to cut it, especially when I knew in the not too distant future that my commute was bound to change. It was no longer going to be 10 miles each way or 20 miles round trip. It could be 30 miles, 40 miles, 50 miles, possibly even more. And so I wanted to have a method of transportation that still allowed me to retain the capabilities of a car, but at the same time give me a lot more efficiency than my current vehicle. So that ultimately led me to consider motorcycles, just so I can have the best of both worlds in that regard. So now that we've answered that question of what led me to want to utilize motorcycles as an alternative method of transportation in the first place, now I want to answer the question, what's my history of motorcycles? And the answer to that question, especially at the time when I was considering, none. I had never ridden a motorcycle before, never ridden a vehicle with a clutch before. And so being an absolute newbie, I was really conscious of wanting to choose a motorcycle that was really cheap, something that I wasn't afraid of dropping or damaging, preferably not necessarily something that was used, because I didn't want to inherit somebody's basket case. I just wanted to get a machine that I could learn the basics really quickly, and hopefully was something that I can utilize to start saving some money on gas. And so the search began. I started to watch a bunch of different videos on YouTube about beginner motorcycles, talking to folks that were at my job who also ride motorcycles, giving advice on certain bikes to look out for. And the bikes that I was typically seeing either on the internet or that was recommended to me from co-workers and friends that alike were always these sport bikes or cruisers, and sometimes even naked bikes. And a lot of them were all built for folks who are a lot smaller than me. At the time, I was about 300 pounds, a little over 300 pounds, and I am 6'5". So the vast majority of the motorcycles that were considered beginner bikes were completely outruled, because beginner bike in the motorcycle industry typically means low seat height and low CC. Now, the small displacement I wasn't too concerned with, especially being a beginner. I didn't want to have anything that was going to get me into trouble. But as far as the seat height is concerned, I definitely wanted to make sure that I bought something that I was comfortable on, especially something that I was potentially going to be riding all the time. And so, looking at the recommendations that a lot of folks were making, either in the videos and from my coworkers, I just couldn't see myself scrunched over on a Ninja 400 or sitting super low on a Rebel 250, Rebel 300. So I needed other alternatives. And that's when I started to come across a lot of content on YouTube about these Chinese dual sport bikes that you can buy off of the internet, such as the Hawk 250, the TBR7, Life and Expect, the list goes on. All these motorcycles are pretty much the same. They just have different name brands, but they're typically constructed in the same manner. But what was really great about these bikes is that literally every single one of them had about a seat height that was around 35 inches. And that was great for me. It was a bike that was tall enough for a guy who's 6'5", and it was still low CC, so I wouldn't get myself in trouble. And they were really cheap, around $1,500, maybe even $2,000. And so I went ahead and went online to Amazon and wanted to go ahead and pull the trigger on a Hawk 250. I go to Amazon, I click the order button, and lo and behold, cannot be shipped to California. So finding out that purchasing my very first motorcycle was going to be a difficult process due to the regulations here in California, I still tried to look for some alternative options. And there was a company that still sold Chinese dual sport bikes, and there's really only one that was legal here in the state of California, and that is CSC. Now, in comparison to the Hawk 250 and TBR7 and all the other different Chinese dual sport bikes of the like, the CSC brand of the Chinese dual sport bike, theirs is the TT250, was about well over double the price out the door for pretty much the same bike. So I didn't want to buy one brand new from CSC. I was definitely willing to buy one brand new off of Amazon, but from CSC it was a bit too steep of an investment, especially on a bike that I didn't really know whether or not I was going to be fully committed to riding just yet. So this is what led me to start to look in the used marketplace. This was ultimately something I didn't want to do in the first place, but my options for brand new bikes that were around $2,000, well, that was shot down by California regulations. So into the used marketplace we went. And I was lucky to find a almost like new used CSC TT250. I went ahead and messaged the guy, met him. He was kind enough to teach me some of the basics of how to ride, working the clutch and shifting. I spent around 30 minutes trying to ride around a parking lot, and after I was done, handed him the money, and just like that, my first bike was the CSC TT250. I kept my CSC TT250 for about 3 months. I put 130 miles on it, and in that time, I was pretty much just using it as a learner bike. I was learning the basics, gaining confidence as a rider. And once I got confident enough to go out onto the city streets, I started running some errands, going to the mailbox, going to the grocery store here and there. I also got to learn a bit about maintenance as well. I did a valve adjustment, had to fix a few things that were wrong with it, changed the battery, did some upgrades to it, and once I was done with that bike, because I realized its limitations, it's not a very fast bike, and I knew that my upcoming job change was going to potentially require me to have a machine that was a bit more capable. So I ultimately ended up selling that bike, and then, well, we were looking for our upgrade. So this leads us to our last question. What led you to buy a CSC motorcycle in comparison to the competition? And having such a good experience with my first bike, the TT250, albeit I didn't really keep it for very long, but nonetheless, it let me consider other options that CSC had in their lineup. And those other options were the RX line, the RX3 or the RX4. I also looked at other options such as a used KLR 650, a used V-Strom, a used BMW GS, and things of that nature. Knowing that I already had a preference against used motorcycles at the time, I went ahead and opted for the brand new CSC RX3. And if you check out my first version of this video, should you buy a CSC motorcycle, save money on gas, in that video I go in a lot more detail about specifications and characteristics between all the different bikes that kind of influence my decision to ultimately purchase a CSC motorcycle. All right, so I hope you guys got a better understanding of my background, my history of motorcycles, what ultimately led me to purchase a CSC motorcycle for my commuting needs. Again, if you would like a much more detailed, itemized type of comparison of all the different bikes that I was considering back then, the first version of this video, should you buy a CSC motorcycle, save money on gas, I'll have it posted at the end of this video, so that way you can click on that and see the specifications and kind of the comparison that I was doing back then, which ultimately led me to make the decision that the RX3 was better than whatever the bike. So now in this section of the video, we're going to talk about, well, how effective was the RX3 overall at being a commuter bike? And so we're going to talk about some data and statistics of what I've accumulated over the past year in comparison to what my estimated benchmarks were in my old video. So here we go. So in my old video, I estimated my annual mileage to be about 14,400 miles just commuting back and forth from work. I also added in about 960 miles of miscellaneous riding, be it doing grocery shopping, errands around town, visiting folks. Those are the like, okay? So my total estimated annual mileage was to be around 15,360 miles. This averages to about 42 miles every single day. The current odometer on my RX3 is 7,401 miles. This brings us to a total mileage deficiency of 7,959 miles, or a total downtime of 189.5 days out of the 365 days in the year. Now, if you watch my final review video that I've done on my CSC RX3, you would know all the different reliability issues and just issues I've been having with that bike. But looking at just these hard numbers here, it doesn't really tell the full story. There was definitely quite a bit of downtime for the RX3 due to reliability concerns, but There's also things that we need to consider, such as the engine break-in periods, which I actually had to do twice on my bike. So that's about 1,000 miles off. And then there's also, just in general, throughout the year, there's certain things that happen within my own personal life that I was just off from work, or I really didn't even start commuting back and forth from work until at least to my new job, until around March. So we're going to factor in all those statistics, and then we're going to come up with some new numbers. All right, so now we're accounting for the mileage that was actually ridden while I was commuting back and forth between my new job, because this is what all the data is based off of, especially with the old video. We're also accounting for the engine break-in mileage between both of the engines on my bike, where I wasn't able to commute. So it was just miscellaneous me riding around just because I needed to get through the engine braking process. We're also accounting for the time that, well, I wasn't even working, the times where commuting was unnecessary, because either I was on leave or there was a certain event that happened, such as my father passing away. So I was just off of work on bereavement for quite a while. So when we account for all these different factors, well, here are the results. So we're looking at a total of 189 days of operation. We still maintain that daily average of 42 miles per day. The estimated mileage for the total days in operation would be around 7,938 miles. And the estimated mileage to present day, the time of me making this video, will be 12,306. That estimated mileage in total days in operation, that's really up to the point where I decided to park the bike. But had I still been running it, it would be at 12,306 miles. And now when we account for the engine break-in process that we did twice, all the miscellaneous mileage that we did prior to starting my new job position, we are left with 5,041 miles on the odometer. So corrected. So this is the amount of mileage that I was actually riding to and from work, and also doing grocery shopping for that span of 189 days while it was in operation. So that brings us to a total mileage deficiency of 2,897 miles, which is a total downtime of 69 days. Now, the mileage deficiency to present day would be 7,265 miles, and total downtime till present day is 173 days. So with all these circumstantial factors accounted for, such as the engine braking process, the time that I was off from work, and me doing experiments on the bike when I was on parental leave, and lastly, just being on bereavement from my father passing away, the amount of downtime, even with all those factors considered, was still pretty substantial. In fact, the amount of downtime in comparison to the time that it was actually operational, it was down 36.5% of the time. So literally more than a third of the ownership experience was the bike just sitting, needing major attention. Now we come to the question, how much money did we actually save on gas using my CSC RX3 in comparison to using my pickup truck? And we're also going to account for the downtime, because every time that the bike was down, I was forced to use my other vehicles to get to work, be it my pickup truck and sometimes, other methods. But we're going to go ahead and account for that here in just a moment. All right, so in this section, we're finally going to talk about how much money we actually saved in gas riding my CSC RX3 in comparison to using my pickup truck. Before we get into that, we have to address the gas prices. And from my last video, I utilized the gas price that was available at the time, which I believe was $5.49. But over the span of the last year, gas prices have fluctuated quite a bit. At the highest I've seen was $6.09, and the lowest was $3.59. And I went ahead and calculated an average throughout the whole year based on my data, and the average gas price lands around $4.99. So that's what we're going to be using to go forth with calculating our metric of how much money we actually saved over the whole year. So with gas costing $4.99, we managed to reach a total of 5,041 miles. The estimated total, had I used my pickup truck to drive that amount of mileage, and my pickup truck only getting 13 miles to the gallon, we would have spent $1,934.96. The amount of mileage, or the amount of money I actually spent utilizing my RX-3 was $457.36. So the amount of money we actually saved was $1,477.60. Now, when we account for the downtime where I was forced to use my pickup truck to drive to and from work and around instead of using the bike, we spent a total of $1,112 utilizing the pickup truck for the amount of downtime. So the total money that we actually saved when we account for the downtime is only $365.60. But there was also some unforeseen expenses, such as me driving all the way down to CSC to get the head replaced. That road trip costed me $283.31 in gas, hauling the bike all the way down there with my pickup truck. And also my battery died unexpectedly on the bike, stranding me at work. That also cost me $114.05 to replace. So, accounting for the unnecessary and unexpected expenses, that's a total of $397.36. So that brings us actually into the negative of negative $31.76. Obviously, there's other maintenance items that I've done with the bike, such as oil filters, oil. I even bought tires and other preventative items that I was going to use on the bike, but never got a chance to. We're not going to count those because, well, truth be told, any bike and any vehicle that you have are going to need those items. So as you guys can see, the RX-3 didn't do very well. In fact, it did pretty terribly. It didn't save me any money at all. It's actually been costing me money to run this bike as a commuter bike. And I would like to share, however, how much money I would have saved had the bike not given me any issues. So here we continue to have our average gas price of $4.99. But the total mileage to this day, had I continued to operate the bike and it didn't give me issues, I would have reached 12,306 miles. Now, if we go ahead and estimate how much I would have spent using my pickup truck to travel that amount of mileage, it would have been $4,723.61. But the amount of money I would have spent using my bike driving that amount of mileage would have been $1,116.49. That would have given me a total amount of money saved of $3,607.12. And had the bike continued to not give me any issues and I stayed on course with riding the bike every single day, we would have reached our return on investment threshold, or the point at which we would have had the bike would have paid for itself. I would have reached it in 1.67 years, or at 24,127 miles. Now, based on my total experience this past year, with all the issues that I've been experiencing, and just seeing the amount of money I actually saved on gas being in the negative, it was a no-brainer to me to retire the RX-3 and just get another bike that was going to be a lot more capable for the job. Had I not purchased a new bike, which is the bike that you're been seeing in the background this whole video, but had I not purchased my new bike, my total downtime would have been 7,265 miles, and the amount of money that I would have continued to drive my pickup truck would have been $2,788.64. So my total deficit would have increased to $1,709 from, negative $31. So it was a no-brainer to me to just go ahead and pull the trigger on purchasing a new bike, because this amount here of $2,700, well, that's a new bike pretty much. So there you have it, folks. Should you buy a CSC or a Chinese motorcycle for the purpose of daily transportation? I encourage you not to. The main issue when it comes to these bikes is the reliability. They just are not capable enough to handle being used on a daily basis for serious commuting. I know that commuting for most folks, could mean a lot of different things. Some folks only commute 10 miles round trip. Some others maybe only commute a couple times a week. When I say a commuter bike, I'm talking about replacing your main method of transportation. We're talking about riding 12,000 miles a year or more. When it comes to that particular aspect and fulfilling that particular job, you're definitely going to need a bike that has the quality and the reliability to stand up to the task. You can only save money on gas by riding a motorcycle if the motorcycle is operational and ready to be ridden, right? So the reliability aspect, it's really mostly about minimizing downtime. And even if downtime occurs, you want that window of downtime to be as small as possible. No motorcycle is perfect, and especially if it's going to be ridden to the extent as it's ridden in my use case, 15,000 miles a year, you're definitely potentially going to run into a couple hiccups. But the likeliness of those hiccups occurring all boils down to the build quality of the machine. Obviously, when you choose a low quality, cheap Chinese built machine, the likeliness of these hiccups occurring is much higher than something that's made with much higher quality, such as a Japanese made machine. I've made a video comparing my new bike, my 2005 KLR 650, in comparison to my CSC RX3. That video is on my channel. I'm going to go ahead and put a link to it at the end of the video that you can just click on. That's going to go into a lot more details about specific aspects about each bike and which categories that each bike excels in. I highly encourage you to check that video out just so you can get a better understanding of certain aspects about the difference between a Japanese built machine versus a Chinese built machine. All right, in this category, I would like to revamp some of the characteristics and standards you should set for yourself and for the type of machine that you're looking for to utilize as a main method of transportation. Based off of the evidence and my experience this past year, I have a totally different outlook on what is absolutely necessary for a particular motorcycle to have and to be able to perform in, to be suitable as a daily commuter bike. All right, we're starting things off with the category of reliability. Now, I remember in my older video, I set the goal of the bike's likeliness of reaching the ROI threshold. And I set that as the standard, and that was it. But now, in my experience now, knowing how difficult it was for the past year for the RX3 to perform, I'm not setting that low of a standard anymore. I don't want to judge a motorcycle's capability of reaching the ROI threshold. I actually want it to exceed it, because simply reaching the ROI threshold, that's just the level where the bike pays for itself. We don't want the bike to just pay for itself. We want to exceed it so that way we reach that status of actually saving money on gas. Once your bike is paid for, or it pays for itself, all the money that you save from that point on, it's just money in your pocket. That's where we want to be. Okay? And so again, we don't want to just reach the ROI threshold. We want to exceed it, and exceed it abundantly. Okay? So the bike that you potentially choose will get the most points on its likeliness to abundantly exceed the ROI threshold. The next category is parts support, right? Now, parts support is broken up into different categories. Our number one goal is to minimize downtime, right? We know that no bike is perfect. Things happen. But when things happen, how quickly can we get parts, and how many sources can we find parts from, right? So it's best when there is a large variety of sources to go to, so you can figure out which one's going to get to you the quickest. Okay? Because if you, for example, just like going from my experience with the RX3, there's been situations where I wanted to get parts and I just couldn't get them because they just didn't have them in stock. And with literally only one source of parts, which is CSC, I'm just a duck stuck in water, right? Sure, I can go ahead and try to order them from eBay, or order them from Alibaba, some type of Chinese website, but now I'm going to be waiting for months, And so part availability, and hopefully in a large variety, is going to be much more beneficial than just having a small variety or small amount of sources to get parts from, right? So this is, can you get the parts locally? Can you go into the aftermarket? Is there actually, superior parts? You want a part that can exceed the OEM standard, right? Maybe you can go into the used market, right? Because there are a lot of bikes around that you could just go to a junkyard real quick and get this part from, get something really, really cheap. That's something that we want to look out for. Okay. And that's another thing about my experience with the RX3 is that when certain parts failed, or when certain parts were constantly giving me issues, even after replacing them with the same OEM parts, it was the low quality of the Chinese, manufacturing that causes the problem in the first place. So replacing it with another low quality part was only a matter of time for it to fail, over again, right? So the availability of aftermarket parts that exceed OEM specifications is really key here, because again, no bike is perfect, but if you can find something that's going to fix its flaws, that's ideal. Okay. Next is maintenance intervals. How often do I have to do specific tedious maintenances? And for my RX3, it was valve adjustments constantly. I had to do valve adjustments almost every week, right? So you want to find a bike that, when it comes to those tedious, very difficult maintenances, that it has an extremely long maintenance interval. Okay. Maintenance difficulty. This is more, not only when it comes to the more tedious maintenances, but even with the simple stuff. How hard is it to change the oil? How hard is it to get to the air filter? How hard is it to take the bike apart to do certain routine things? The easier and simpler the design of the machine, the better. And then lastly, the cost to maintain. Okay. Now, this goes down to, this can go both ways, because on one side, when you have a certain bike that's of a higher quality, sometimes parts can cost a bit more. But it goes back to that point of variety. Maybe you can get in from somewhere that's cheaper. You don't always got to get something brand new. You can probably get something used. You can probably get something from the aftermarket that's cheaper. You see what I'm saying? But when it comes to, for example, my experience with the RX-3, getting certain parts, I would have to get parts more frequently because they would fail more often. Or I would just have to use certain materials more often. For example, oil filters. I would just have to use oil filters more often, and they cost a lot more than the oil filters for my new bike. Okay. So it's just things like that you have to consider. Having a bike that's of higher quality, if something does fail, it might cost you a little bit more. But once it's actually fixed, it's fixed. I would much rather, have to replace a head on a bike that's going to run for 100-something thousand miles versus having to replace the head on the bike that's only going to last 2,000 to 3,000 miles. You see the difference? So cost to maintain is an important category, but you have to, weigh those pros and cons. You get something that's of much higher quality, it's going to last you a lot longer versus continuing to buy really, really cheap things over and over and over and over and over again. Cost really does add up. And lastly, we want to minimize downtime. This is what this whole category is about. And so the downtime should be less than 5% of your annual mileage. Okay. So for example, my RX-3, I had a total of 36.5% of the entirety of the bike being in operation. Right? We're not even accounting for it till present day. Just while the bike was in operation, it was down 36.5% of the time. Right? You can't save money on gas if the bike's not operational to be ridden to save money on gas. Okay. So you want to minimize your downtime, and ideally you want a bike that has less than 5% downtime for the entirety of the year, or just the entirety that it's in operation. Okay. So I know that not everyone can ride year round like I can here in California. Some of you have riding seasons. So whatever your riding season may be it 9 months, 6 months, however, whatever you choose to use your motorcycle instead of your car, whatever that span of time is, you want your downtime to be less than 5%. The next category that we're going to discuss is the performance category. And we're going to start off with the question, is the bike capable enough for your everyday commuting needs? Now, this capability is based on specifically how you're going to be riding the bike every single day. And I know everybody's needs may be different, but I would just generally like to argue, especially when it comes to most American applications, a bike that can comfortably operate at 50 miles an hour minimum is really what's ideal. And what I mean by operate at comfortably at 50 miles an hour minimum, we're talking about a power utilization of less than 70%. So what exactly does that mean? That means whichever motorcycle it is that you choose, you should not be utilizing more than 70% of the available power band to ride and operate at your everyday commuting needs. So for example, for my RX-3, because it was a smaller displacement CC bike, in the way that I had it geared for my typical use case, I was operating that machine at 7,000 RPM when its red line is at 9,000 RPM. That's 77% of the available power band that it was riding at every single day. And even with the stock gearing, riding on my commute route at 55 miles an hour, I was still riding at about 6,500 RPMs, and that was 72% of power utilization. So still over 70%. Okay. Now, smaller displacement motorcycles, they're great when it comes to fuel efficiency and just simplicity and cost efficiency. I mean, they're pretty cheap, but keeping the power utilization down below 70%, really ideally 50%, is really going to increase engine longevity across the board. This is the same concept that we get from, passenger cars. Most passenger cars will rev anywhere between 2,000 to 3,000 RPMs while riding on the highway and have a red line at around 6,000 to 8,000, maybe even 9,000 RPM. That keeps their power utilization at or below 50% for the majority of its operation, which again ensures engine longevity. Most modern cars today can exceed well over 100,000, more likely over 200,000 to 300,000 miles, with just general maintenance performed at the proper intervals. Now, when it comes to motorcycles in general rev higher than car engines. It's just a fact. But whatever that available power band may be, you want to ensure that that power utilization on your daily commute is at or less than 70%, ideally 50%, just like it is with the car world. Next is MPG performance. Now, when it comes to this category, we would ideally want to shoot for 50 MPG or better. But our ability to reach that MPG number is going to vary depending on the engine displacement of the motorcycle that we choose. Generally speaking, higher displacement engines get lower MPG performance than smaller displacement engines. However, we also have to keep in mind our power utilization. In general, smaller displacement engines rev a lot higher than larger displacement engines do. So you just have to keep in mind to ensure that you keep that power utilization below that 70% threshold, ideally 50%, which is going to be a lot more likely with a larger displacement engine. So based on your particular situation and your commuting needs, you're going to have to find a compromise that suits you best. And last but not least is versatility. What I've learned with my RX-3 is it's not a very versatile bike when it comes to certain situations. It performs well in the inner city streets, performs moderately well when it came to my daily commute, but it definitely didn't belong riding on the highway. And when it came to my long distance traveling that I did last year, riding all the way from my place of residence down to Los Angeles, over 700 miles round trip, I was definitely desiring a vehicle that was a bit more capable, to be a lot safer on the roads, and just in general gave me a bit more comfort while riding at highway speeds. A small displacement single cylinder motorcycle just like the RX-3 is spinning at around 8,000 RPMs just to keep up with traffic, which is not very ideal and not very comfortable for long periods of time. But that's not necessary to say that all small displacement motorcycles are incapable of highway travel. It just depends on how they're designed and manufactured. So let's take, for example, a small displacement multi-cylinder motorcycle like the Yamaha MT-03. It will rev at around 7,500 RPMs to ride at highway speeds. And with it being a multi-cylinder motorcycle, it rides a lot smoother. And with a red line at 12,000 RPMs, its power utilization at highway speeds is actually only 62%. So small displacement motorcycles can definitely still be versatile. It just depends on how they're designed, and you always want to keep in mind that power utilization. It's much better to have if you're going to be going for a small displacement motorcycle, that it's multi-cylinder, to ensure that your power utilization is well below that 70% threshold. So if you select a motorcycle that has certain limitations in performance, or maybe even a scooter, then you're going to be a lot more likely to use maybe your car or your truck to do certain duties that you would have done had you picked a motorcycle that had the versatility to be used in those situations. Having a motorcycle that's extremely versatile ensures that we take advantage of every opportunity where we can ride the motorcycle instead of using our cars, so that way we can optimize our chances of saving money on gas. And with ending on that note, that's going to segue us into our next category, which is convenience. And we're going to start things off with accessories. Now, I don't know about you, but when it comes to me commuting with my motorcycle, it's not merely a method of transportation to and from work. It's my workhorse. I go to the grocery store with it. I go run errands with it. And having the ability to have panniers and a top box makes doing those specific tasks and having a place to store luggage very convenient. Also, doing tedious maintenances, not really tedious, but repetitive maintenances such as cleaning the chain or changing tires or whatever it may be, it's nice that the bike has the ability to fit a center stand on it. So those are important accessories to consider when looking for a commuter bike. And going hand in hand with the top box and panniers is the cargo capacity or the load capacity. What is the weight limit of the bike? Is there available aftermarket suspension that you can upgrade the bike with to increase its load limit? Do you ride 2-up on the bike, right? Do you go, once again, are you going grocery shopping? Or maybe you want to go on a really long adventure trip. This also plays a little bit into the versatility that we were just talking about. We want to ensure that this bike can be utilized in any aspect as possible, right? So having a bike that has a high enough load capacity for our needs, for whatever it is that we may want to use the bike for, is a very important aspect to consider. The next category we want to consider is overall weight. A lighter motorcycle is easier and more convenient to handle around, whether riding and even when it's stationary. It's a lot easier to maneuver than a heavier one is. Lighter is better. And lastly, the lane splitting ability. Now, you may not live in a state like I do that allows lane splitting, but the overall width of the motorcycle, if you do live in a state where it's legal to lane filter or lane split, the overall width of the motorcycle is a very important consideration. The smaller the profile, the easier it is for you to get in between cars and a lot safer for you to maneuver traffic. All right, our next category that we're going to discuss is comfort. And we're going to start with ergonomics for your body type. For example, I'm 6'5". I already explained to you guys in the intro that there were just certain motorcycles, well, really not just certain, the majority of the motorcycles that are out there on the market just aren't suitable for someone of my size, being 6'5". But if you're someone who is of a more ideal height, maybe 5'9", you have your pick of the litter when it comes to motorcycles out there. But there may be certain models that are a lot more suitable in other categories that we've discussed before. Maybe it's not the most comfortable bike at this point in time, but because of the performance and the convenience, well, you really want it. All right, well, then that brings us to the next category, which is aftermarket availability for modifications. And honestly, no bike is perfect for any particular individual straight out the factory. Maybe you're lucky and you find your dream bike and it fits you perfectly. It's great for you. But everybody's going to want to possibly adjust some foot pegs, get a comfier seat, maybe get some bar risers. These are things to consider. Is the bike that you're choosing, are there aftermarket availability, parts available for you to make those modifications to tailor the bike to suit you best? After all, this is a motorcycle you're going to be using every single day. So it's pretty important to ensure that you're very comfortable in that saddle. And next is just as important as extra features, whether they come standard or there's aftermarket options. Getting features like heated grips, taller windscreen, highway pegs, etc. These are all things that are going to make your life a lot easier riding in different situations, right? This is a bike you're going to be using, well, as much as you can every single day, riding hopefully in all different kinds of weather. So having hand guards and heated grips, a tall windscreen, highway pegs, it's going to make your life a lot easier. And whichever bike it is that you're considering hopefully all of those accessories and more are available to be fitted on the bike. The next category is going to be safety. This is an extremely critical category. We're already taking a huge risk by utilizing a motorcycle instead of a car to commute around on a daily basis. Studies show that we are 27 times more likely to be involved in an accident while riding on a motorcycle. Now, any motorcycle that has certain features that are going to aid in minimizing that risk is highly favorable. The first category is stopping power. It's pretty simple. How quickly can you bring that motorcycle safely to a complete stop? And that really has everything to do with the brakes on the motorcycle, front and rear. How big is the rotors and how many pistons are in the caliper? The bigger the rotors, the more pistons in the caliper, I would generally say the better, but it just depends on how big the motorcycle is overall, because the bigger the bike and the heavier the load, the more stopping power you're going to need. This also kind of ties into the aftermarket as well. Is there some availability for higher performance brake pads? Can you swap out the rotor for a larger rotor or a more higher performance rotor? Can you swap out the caliper for a higher performance caliper? Maybe it's a caliper with just 1 or 2 pistons. Maybe you want one with 4. These are all things to consider when it comes to the stopping power. I mean, a bike stock doesn't always have to be high performance, but if there's availability for you to upgrade, that's something to consider. You don't want to just write off a bike just because of its stock configuration. Next category will be features. Now, for majority of these features, such as ABS, traction control, rider modes, etc., these are generally things that you can't get in the aftermarket. So if a bike comes with certain features such as these, it's highly favorable. But regardless of how many features and rider modes and other bells and whistles a potential bike might have, it's not going to fix bad riding habits. So it's most important, regardless of how your bike is configured and regardless of how many doodads it may have to help you be safer, it's most important for you as a rider to practice and train as much as possible, right? The rider modes and things of that nature are completely useless if you don't know how to ride them and you don't know how they are supposed to optimize their performance in certain situations. So go out there, play with the different rider modes, see how it affects the handling and overall characteristics of performance in the bike, find out what's best for you in certain situations. But above all, practice your emergency stops and swerves and other basic training and maneuvers that you practice in the MSF course. All right. No matter what riding mode you're in, maybe you forgot, you want to be able to react and feel how the bike is performing and be ready for whatever situation that may come your way. Some may argue that riding modes add a layer of complexity to the whole safety scenario that really shouldn't be there. I think that they're great to aid you and ride in certain riding conditions, but again, just be mindful. Make sure that you practice. And lastly, never forget ATGAT, which is all the gear, all the time. Now, the last category that we're going to be considering here is the value. Now, this is where you have to take into consideration all the different categories that we just discussed before. So when you take into account the reliability, the performance, the convenience, comfort, and safety, all according to your specific situation and your commuting needs, you got to pick the best bike for the cash. All right, what's the bike that's going to maximize or give you the best results in all categories across the board and fit your commuting needs the best? And then next, which we're going to be talking about a lot more in depth, is the ROI threshold, or return on investment threshold. So it's more favorable, which we're going to see later on, to spend less money on a bike than more money. Yeah, I mean, obviously there are certain bikes out there that are absolutely amazing commuter bikes, but they come with a certain price tag. That's not necessarily ideal for wanting to use a motorcycle as a commuter bike. And we're going to see that when we start talking about this ROI threshold, and I'm going to give you some more statistics about how you're going to reach that. So let's dive into it. All right, so now that we have finished our revamped ranking system, we're now going to look into some examples of ROI thresholds for particular motorcycles. I'm going to be using my CSC RX3 and also my new bike, my 2005 KLR 650, for this demonstration. All right, here we have it. So starting from the top, we're going to be using the average gas price of $4.99, and our annual mileage is going to be 13,200 miles a year. The annual mileage is a bit different when it comes to my KLR and my truck, mainly because I utilize the KLR a bit differently than I did my RX3. My RX3 was a bit limited in the sense where I could go on the highway, but it didn't really belong there. Whereas with the KLR, I just ride it the whatever way is most convenient, right? If it's just more convenient for me to just ride it on the highway whenever I need to. And so the amount of MPG performance that I average with the KLR is around 45 miles to the gallon. Whereas with the RX3, riding strictly back roads, I got around 55 miles to the gallon. As we can see here, with the pickup truck, we would be spending about $5,066.77 a year in gas. With the minivan, we would be spending $3,293.40 a year in gas. With my KLR, I would only be spending $1,463.73 a year in gas. And with the RX3, traveling a bit further distance because I can't use the highway, or I would rather I not use the highway, I will be spending $1,306.47 a year in gas. Now, when it comes to calculating the return on investment threshold, we first take the overall cost of whatever motorcycle it is that you purchase. We then take the overall savings in comparison to whatever vehicle it is that you're trying to save money on gas with, and you divide the cost by the savings, and you'll be left with a ratio that you can then multiply to the overall annual mileage. So for example, my KLR to this point in time, the present day of me making this video, my total build cost me $3,101.70. The overall savings in comparison to my pickup truck is about $3,603.04 and $1,829.67 in comparison to my minivan. Now that brings my ROI threshold, when I go ahead and divide the cost by the savings, that would be 0.86 years or 11,363 miles that I would have to travel to reach my return on investment threshold for the pickup truck. Now, if I was replacing my minivan, it would take me 1.69 years, or I would have to travel a total of 22,377 miles for the minivan. Right? Now, with the RX3, same thing. We divide the cost by the overall savings, and we have, for the pickup truck, we have a savings of $3,760.30 a year, and for the minivan, $1,986.93 a year. That brings our ROI to 1.67 years or 24,127 miles for the pickup truck, and 3.17 years or 45,658 miles to replace the minivan. So as you guys can see here, there's certain aspects that play a key role when it comes into calculating these results. And we're going to start with the initial purchase price of the motorcycle that you choose. Depending on how much your bike costs, that's going to dramatically affect the ROI threshold duration. Okay. For my KLR, it's literally half the amount of time and less than half the amount of mileage that I have to ride to reach that threshold of where my bike pays for itself, right? In comparison to my RX-3. Even though the MPG performance is slightly lower, in reality, it's only a difference in about $160, which in the grand scheme of things is really not that much. But overall, the initial cost of the bike is drastically going to affect your ROI. Another aspect is, what vehicle are you replacing, right? If you're replacing a vehicle that gets relatively decent gas mileage, such as 20 mpg, right? It's going to take you a much longer time to reach that ROI threshold. And depending on which bike you choose, you really got to honestly ask yourself, is this motorcycle capable of reaching that threshold, right? Is it really realistic that my bike is going to reach, in an example for the RX-3, 45,000 miles? And the obvious answer is absolutely not. I think the highest mileage RX-3 that I've seen was around 29 something thousand miles before needing to have major engine work. And that really wasn't even the bike riding in the conditions that we're riding, which is every single day. You know, riding an RX-3 every single day, well, according to my own experience, it's not going to do well, right? Couldn't even reach 2,000 to 3,000 miles before needing major engine work. So you have to look at that mileage number and account for all the different aspects that we've talked about earlier in this video, especially when it comes to reliability, because it's not only the likelihood of the motorcycle reaching that threshold. You also have to think about downtime. You also have to think about parts availability, right? You can only reach this threshold, realistically reach this threshold, if the bike is constantly ready and available to be used, right? Otherwise, if you choose a very unreliable motorcycle, the amount of downtime is going to undo all of your progress. Earlier in this video, we saw that the RX-3 had 36.5% of downtime, which in the grand scheme of things, I was actually negative because of the downtime when it came to my ROI threshold progress. And that's not what you want. You don't want a bike that's going to be costing you to run and to utilize. You want a bike that's going to give you a return on your investment. So this is why reliability of your bike is one of the absolute most important factors when it comes to the realistically reaching your ROI threshold. The other aspects, such as MPG performance and purchase price, they're going to allow you to either reach that ROI threshold faster, or it's going to take you a little bit longer, but the reliability aspect is what's going to ensure that you're going to get there. The last aspect I want you to consider is the overall mileage that you ride per year. When it comes to this chart, the amount of miles that you would have to reach that ROI threshold, that's pretty static. But depending on how many miles that you ride a year, let's say you do half the amount of mileage that I do, well, it's going to take you twice as long. And so I want you to ask yourself, are you truthfully going to commit to riding, let's say, for example, the RX-3, right? And you have a car that gets 20 miles to the gallon. Okay, if you were riding the amount of miles that I ride, it's going to take you 3.17 years to reach the ROI threshold or reach 45,000 miles. Okay, now realistically speaking, that's not going to happen, but let's just theoretically say that it would. Are you really going to be committed to riding 3 years straight to reach that ROI threshold? And not only reach it, are you going to be committed to continue to ride to exceed that threshold. Because once you exceed the threshold, that's when you really start saving money on gas. When you reach a threshold, that's just you paying your bike off, but you want to exceed it. And now let's say that you ride half the amount of mileage that I ride every year. Well, now that duration is doubled. You're still going to have to reach 45,000 miles, but now it's going to take you about 6.3 years. Are you really realistically going to be committed to riding that particular motorcycle for over 6 years straight? And again, that's just to reach your ROI threshold. Are you going to continue to ride it after that 6.3 years? These are all aspects that you need to consider when it comes to choosing your motorcycle. Now we're going to look at some examples that may apply to the majority of you that are out there. Not everyone has the ability to ride year-round like I can in California. So I went ahead and adjusted the annual mileage to 9,000 miles a year. You have a certain riding season, which is in between spring and fall. Wintertime, you park the bike. The national gas price average across the country. Again, you probably don't live in a state where gas prices are as high as it is in my state. National gas price average at the point in time of me making this video is $3.26. The average car MPG. Maybe you're not replacing a pickup truck. Maybe your car gets pretty decent gas mileage. Most folks do, especially if they're more modern. So the average car MPG is around 25 MPG. So here we go with some honorable mentions. Number 1, a Royal Enfield Meteor 350. This is one of the most popular cruiser bikes that folks like to get to save money on gas. It gets about 70 mpg, and the cost for this motorcycle brand new at a dealership out the door is around $7,000. When we factor in our new metrics of 9,000 miles a year, our gas price at $3.26 a gallon, and with your average car MPG of being 25 miles per gallon, we get a ROI calculation of 9.28 years or 83,503 miles just to reach the ROI threshold for the Royal Enfield Meteor. Going on with the Honda, same thing. This time, the Honda gets around 65 miles per gallon. Also a very popular choice for saving money on gas. It's going to cost you around $11,000 out the door, out at a dealership. The ROI on this bike is going to be about 15.23 years or 137,077 miles. Our next honorable mention will be a Honda Super Cub. This is one of those little 125 scooters. Now, it's fabled that this little scooter can get well over 120 mpg. It's just, out of all the data that I could find, that was pretty much the average. It's possible you can get higher, but I just chose 120. So with this Honda Super Cub, it's going to cost you around $5,500 out the door at a dealership. Now, your ROI for this little scooter is going to be 5.92 years or 53,277 miles. And lastly is going to be my personal recommendation. You buy whatever used bike you want, preferably Japanese, that's going to get around 50 miles per gallon, and it's going to cost you about $3,000. You're going to hit your return on investment in 5.11 years or 46,012 miles. And as you guys can see here, buying whatever used bike you want is going to get you the lowest or the easiest time of reaching the ROI threshold. Buying a bike brand new, yes, you have a certainty of maintenance history and things of that nature, but it's the initial cost of the bike that's going to really set you back from reaching that ROI threshold. We can also see within this list, it's a mixed variety of capability, right? The Honda NC750X is probably the most capable bike on this list, but it's also the most expensive bike on this list. The Royal Enfield is kind of that middle ground where it really mostly excels in the inner city and back road type riding, but it's not too shy of being able to ride on the highway. And then lastly, your Super Cub, which is really strictly for inner city stuff. all of these motorcycles would be considered optimal for certain situations. But you want a more capable bike, it's going to come with a higher price tag. That higher price tag is really going to eat into your ROI threshold. And even with a bike as capable and as reliable and as well known as a Honda, 137,000 miles is still 137,000 miles. All right. So you really got to think about whether or not it's realistic for that Honda to be ridden 137,000 miles without any major issues. And even with the major issues put aside, that's a lot of maintenance in between. All right, before we end this video, I would like to revisit the rankings, just to give a final ranking between my new bike and my old CSC RX3. Considering all the new revamped criteria after my year of experience riding the CSC RX3 and all the new things I've learned, here's how the ranking system goes. Starting with the KLR, and we're going to start things off with the reliability category. Now for the reliability category, the KLR gets a 10 out of 10. It is the one bike that has the highest capability and the highest likelihood of not only reaching but exceeding the ROI threshold abundantly. The part support for the KLR is abundant. It's everywhere. There's dozens of sources for you to get parts from, and even locally in use. Parts are everywhere for this bike. The maintenance intervals are extremely long. The maintenance difficulty is not hard to do. There's a plethora of resources out there for you to get information on how to do certain things. The cost to maintain is extremely low, and downtime is definitely going to be lower than 5%. In the performance category, it's also definitely a 10 out of 10. It is definitely capable enough for my everyday community needs. My power utilization, no matter what it is that I'm doing, whether I'm riding on the highway or I'm riding on the back roads, my power utilization is below 70%. And when I'm actually riding on the back roads, it's even lower at 43%, so lower than 50%. The MPG performance, I get 50 MPG depending on where I ride. The versatility of the KLR 650 is unmatched. It is a jack of all trades bike that can be a pack mule, a long distance tour, a highway commuter, in-city commuter, you name it. This bike can be whatever it is that you want it to be. For the category of convenience, the KLR gets a 9 out of 10. As far as accessories, the sky is the limit. You can get whatever you want on this bike: center stand, panniers, top box, heated grips, a bigger windscreen, all of it. The cargo and load capacity is excellent. The lane splitting ability of this motorcycle is also excellent. The only category where the KLR is slightly lacking in is the weight. It's not necessarily completely too heavy. It's just that weight is held up top. It's top heavy, and that can get unwieldy sometimes in certain situations. Next category is comfort, and when it comes to the ergonomics for my body type, being 6'5", the KLR is amazing. And it's a 35-inch seat height. There's aftermarket availability for modifications. Once again, the sky is the limit. There's other added accessories that I can get. Once again, sky is the limit. Heated grips, tall windscreen, highway pegs, I can have it all. Now, for the safety category, this is the only category where the KLR is severely lagging, and it gets a 3 out of 10. The only saving grace for the KLR in this category is the aftermarket availability for upgrades. If it weren't for the aftermarket availability to upgrade its brakes, it really would get a 1 or a 0 in this category. I would at least give it a 1 because the brakes on the KLR are so bad. It's rumored that this is the first motorcycle that actually invented traction control. For the value category, the KLR gets an absolute 10 out of 10. For $3,000, I cannot think of any other motorcycle in existence that gives you the amount of capability that the KLR 650 does. And of regards of reaching the ROI threshold, it's going to take me less than a year, and I don't foresee any issue with the KLR reaching the ROI threshold within that time span. Now, when it comes to the RX-3, starting with reliability, it gets an absolute 0 out of 10. The likeliness of this bike reaching its ROI threshold is the same likeliness that I'm going to become a millionaire in the next 10 seconds. The part support and variety is also non-existent. The maintenance intervals are extremely short. It's ridiculous. The maintenance difficulty is actually not that difficult, but having to do it over and 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 over again is the definition of insanity, and I don't wish that upon anyone. The cost to maintain is expensive for no reason. Why should it cost over $50 for oil filters? Doesn't make any sense. And downtime is abysmal at 36.5%. For the performance category, the RX-3 gets a 3 out of 10. When it comes to my everyday commuting needs, it's barely capable. Matter of fact, it's borderline capable. The power utilization is slightly over 70%, and if I have to ride on the highway, it's definitely a lot higher. The MPG performance is only 55, and for a 250cc motorcycle, I'd expect more. The versatility of the bike is relatively non-existent, mainly because the only versatility, which in my use case that I would be looking for, is its ability to ride on the highway along with riding on the back roads and maybe possibly doing a little bit of off-road, which the RX-3 in all those categories is quite limited because of the power utilization. It's already over 70% just doing back road riding. You put it on the highway, it's going to be even higher, which is going to play back into its Achilles heel, which is valve recession. Valve recession on this motorcycle and having that power utilization that high all the time is just going to cause the valves to recede quicker and faster and faster and faster. For the convenience category, the RX-3 gets a 6 out of 10. The accessories that come with the RX-3 standard are okay. The side boxes and the top box, they're all right. The accessories such as charging ports, they're not very good at all. The cargo and load capacity of the bike is meh. It's only 330 pounds for an adventure bike. It's quite low. The weight of the RX-3 is 420 pounds. It's quite heavy for a 250cc motorcycle. It's not too far off, only about 30 to 20 pounds off from my KLR 650 fully configured. And the lane splitting ability of the RX-3, it's decent, but my KLR is still better. The RX-3 being about 37.5 inches wide, and my KLR being 35.5 inches wide. When it comes to the category of safety, the RX-3 gets a 4 out of 10. The stopping power is not all that great. It's not as bad as the KLR, but still not all that great. The aftermarket availability for upgrades, I think the only thing that is available is some stronger performance brake pads, but no upgraded rotors or pistons. The features, it has ABS, no rider modes or anything else, but ABS. So it gets a 4 out of 10. And lastly, when it comes to value, the RX-3 is an absolute 0 out of 10. In fact, the RX-3 in my lifetime is the only vehicle that I've ever bought brand new, and it has been the most unreliable vehicle that I've ever owned. I don't really foresee any reason why anyone should spend $6,300 on a bike of this caliber that performs so poorly. And when it comes to reliability, and as far as reaching the ROI threshold, that's a pipe dream. So based on those two metrics of reaching the ROI threshold and really for $6,300, there's a million other different choices that I can think about that you should rather spend your money on. All right, in our final results, the KLR 650 has a 52 out of 60, with the CSC RX-3 with a 17 out of 60. Obviously, the KLR is the superior bike in literally every category except for safety. But if you look into that aftermarket and you find at least a bigger brake rotor and possibly some better brake pads, maybe even get an upgraded brake caliber, the KLR 650 will be a half decently safe motorcycle. But regardless of whatever rider modes or other safety features your motorcycle may have, remember, they're all useless unless you know how to operate them properly. So please do your due diligence, train, go to those empty parking lots, practice your safety maneuvers of emergency braking, swerving, and stay alert while you're out there. All right, thank you for watching. I hope this video has been very informative and very entertaining for you, especially if you're someone who was looking to purchase a CSC motorcycle. I hope you have gotten some understanding on certain factors that you should consider before making your purchase. There's definitely a lot more factors other than just price point to consider when it comes to wanting to use a motorcycle to save money on gas. I encourage you to check out the videos that I'm going to have posted at the end of this video. My in-depth comparison between my new bike, my KLR 650, and my CSC RX3. Also, my final review on my CSC RX3. Check both of those videos out. And once again, thanks for watching. Until next time, guys, stay safe out there, and peace.